The late 1960s were years of unprecedented emergence for America's youth. A time of freedom and awareness, a summer of love and a call to action, the birth of group consciousness and the sharing of a vision. By 1969, the burgeoning youth movement was at its zenith, yet sociologists agree that it took but one man, in fact, one image, to bring the free-spirited psychedelic era to its knees. From the cover of Life magazine, the glazed, maniacal stare of this murderous, self-styled guru would serve to alternately beckon and repel the public senses for decades to come. Charles Manson had arrived. It has been said that true celebrity comes when the world knows you by one name alone. If that is the case, Charles Manson has undoubtedly entered the ranks of the immortal, not as a consummate entertainer, but instead as America's favorite boogeyman. More than 20 years after the series of gruesome murders that would assure him a probable lifelong imprisonment, the press and the public still appear to have a boundless fascination with this aging, diminutive sociopath who still appears regularly in magazines, on television, and in theaters around the world. Yet with a near-constant barrage of interviews and exposure, many questions regarding the life and crimes of Charles Manson have gone unanswered. The near-mythical status that Manson has acquired in the annals of violent crime seems curious, when one considers that, in truth, he played no physical part in the savage butchery with which he will be forever associated. Yet Manson remains, by media standards, the undisputed king of the killers, and the focus of a nation's nightmares and its wrath. How did he earn his preferred spot in the dreaded gallery of the all-time infamous? Perhaps the key to Manson's current complexity lies in his simple past. On November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio, the man whose name the world would never forget ironically entered that world as No-Name Maddox, the son of an unwed drifter, 16-year-old Kathleen Maddox. To escape the religious fervor of her domineering mother, Kathleen's youth was spent rambling through the back hills of Kentucky with her infant son in tow. To survive, she learned to accept the favors of a succession of lonely men, one of whom would lend the name of Manson to her fatherless child. Often, while his mother would haunt roadhouses and taverns, Manson would find himself in the care of various backwoods relatives. To this day, the moonshine still explosion which killed his Uncle Jess remains one of Charlie's most vivid childhood memories. Kathleen's wanderlust eventually led her from state to state, but young Charlie had reached an age that was just too distracting to her new boyfriends. Their collective protests caused Kathleen to place the 12-year-old in an Indiana boys' home. The streetwise youngster, however, had grown quite accustomed to the ways of the road, and soon began a cycle of escapes and recapture that would eventually land him in the famous boys' town of Father Flanagan. Yet after a stay of only 4 days, Manson and an accomplice stole a car and fled Boys Town. This action resulted in Manson's first incarceration in a juvenile home, a grim foreshadowing of the decades of institutional life to follow. During his mid-teens, Manson's defiant nature made him a constant discipline problem for authorities, and often cruel methods of punishment were utilized to curb his stormy nature. His slight, frail appearance made him a ready target for the resident bullies as well. Another rash of bold escapes and careless car thefts would delay his release until 1954, at age 19. Soon Manson would marry, and after a brief, frustrating attempt to make an honest living, Manson and his pregnant young wife would leave for California in yet another stolen automobile. As fate would have it, Charlie would again be arrested and jailed, during which time his wife decided to pack up their newborn son and move on without him. Upon his release in 1958, Manson settled in Los Angeles and soon engaged in a series of remarkably petty, illegal endeavors. The forging of a $37 check, a few minor thefts, and even a bungled attempt at pimping on the back streets of Hollywood. Due to his previous record, the collective legal effect of these offenses was harsh, and Manson was soon serving a 7-year prison sentence, the final phase of which was spent at Terminal Island. There he would trade guitar licks with Alvin Creepy Karpis of the Ma Barker gang, and dabble in Scientology, a cultish self-help religion created by science fiction author L. Ron Hubbard. Manson actually grew content with his life at Terminal Island, And when finally facing release in 1967, he pleaded with officials to let him stay. This being a legal impossibility, Manson reluctantly ventured into a strange new world that had leapt a full decade forward. And now this unlucky, uneducated ex-convict, who had spent over 17 of his 32 years in complete confinement, was destined to spend the first months of his newfound freedom in a place where restrictions were virtually unknown. This larcenous, wayfaring hillbilly had stumbled upon the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco during the very height of the psychedelic era. Here Manson reflects on the events of that time.
You guys blame me for the 60s. And then Jerry Rubin and A.B. Hoffman and Timothy Leary and Baba Rondas and all the Holy Moroccos, they all ran the other way when it got too nasty. They would tell their children, raise up and kill your mom and dad, but then when they raised up and killed their mom and dad, then all the people that said that ran. And then they blamed it over on me and said, oh, well, Charlie Manson's a hippie cult leader, and he made kids do all that. But none of them kids that got busted said that. It's like this, man. Back in the 40s, when I'd be on the basketball court, for example, and all the kids would say, hey, your mom's calling you, Billy. You know, so Billy would leave, and then John would leave, and Tom would leave, and I'd be out there sitting on the basketball smoking a joint. You know, and I was unaccepted. I was the outcast. So I ended up stealing a bicycle, and I went to reform school. And then I get out 10 years later, and I go back to the neighborhood, and I go back to the basketball court, and everybody's grown up, and there's a whole new wave of kids there. So we sit and we talk, and I say, whatever happened to Johnny? Well, he died in Korea. Well, whatever happened to Joe? Well, he's an automobile engineer in Detroit. And whatever happened to so-and-so? Well, he moved to Chicago, and then I steal a car, and I get a gun, and I go rob a few places. And then I come back out of prison after 10 years, and I go back over on the basketball court. And the time for Johnny to go home, Johnny doesn't go home. And the basketball court, there's 10 or 15 kids, and it's all the way after dark. And what are you kids doing out after dark? Well, ain't you going to go home for dinner? Oh, no, my mom kicked me out of the house. My mom's a drunk. She don't like me. In other words, the last time I got out in 67, the road that I was walking on, hey, there's a whole bunch of kids walking on the same road. I said, well, I didn't know you knew this place. Well, when I heard Timothy Leary say, tune in and drop out, I knew where they were dropping out to because I had been on the under road, on the back side of what's happening, you know. In other words, in the darkness.
The widespread rebellious climate of this period would give rise to another sociological phenomenon that would almost single-handedly provide Manson with the power to sway young minds. For the radical youth, the collective ideal of the day was to topple the prevailing social structure. Hence, they would often hail common sociopaths, derelicts, and streetwise hustlers as fellow freedom fighters. In this spectrum, ex-convicts were particularly admirable, for they were honored veterans in the war to sabotage the workaday world, and, like martyrs, had suffered for their cause. Being essentially a transient, Manson had begun to frequent communal crash pads, where music, ideals, and meals were freely shared. His colorful jailhouse tales and unique style of guitar playing made him an instant hit with local teens. He was soon regarded as the area's premier streetwise sage, and rapidly adapted his appearance to fit this treasured new role. Prior to this time, Manson's knowledge of the drug scene was limited to occasional marijuana use nearly 2 decades earlier. Suddenly he was thrust into a world of pills and peyote, hallucinogenics which pleasurably altered time and space and gave the user a distorted perspective of reality. This, coupled with the newfound sexual freedom that marked the era, created for Manson the notion that illegal activity was no longer necessary to obtain his needs. For the first time in his life, he felt truly alive, even celebrated, and vowed never to endanger his stay in this virtual Garden of Eden. In the course of Manson's wandering through the bustling hippie mecca of Haight-Ashbury, he would meet and soon share an apartment with Mary Teresa Bruner, who would be the first official member of what the media would eventually dub the Manson family. Bruner would often join Manson on his frequent jaunts, exploring the scenic California coast and meeting a variety of fellow wayfarers. Manson would soon acquire his first transportation, a Volkswagen van, not by theft, but through trading a second-hand piano that a San Jose reverend had given him. Charlie in turn seduced the reverend's lovely young daughter, Ruth Ann, who would later join his growing band of devotees. Manson's dispensing of honest hobo logic and his unfettered lifestyle would prove remarkably enticing to the many young girls he would encounter in his travels. At the beckoning of an ex-cellmate who had connections in the music world, Manson made a solo trip to Los Angeles. It was there he discovered another festive gathering place for free-spirited youth. A casual stroll through Venice Beach would yield one of his most loyal and tireless champions, a petite, freckled redhead named Lynette Frome. On another excursion to Manhattan Beach, future murderess Patricia Krenwinkel would join this virtual gypsy caravan. However, upon their return to San Francisco, the ragtag group found the once peaceful demeanor of the Haight-Ashbury district giving way to a dark, dangerous new element. The rising tide of drug traffic in the streets had brought an influx of violence between rival dope pushers, rampant thieving and prostitution among local addicts. It's ironic, perhaps, that during this period of retreating peace and freedom, Manson would acquire his soon-to-be most destructive and notorious female companion, Susan Denise Atkins. Ironic, too, was the fact that after decades of having been denied any contact with the opposite sex, Manson now commanded a full troupe of adoring females. Luckily, Manson was able to trade the cramped and obsolete van for an old but spacious school bus, which the girls cleverly converted into a stylish hotel on wheels. They eventually found themselves in Los Angeles, where word of this magical minstrel and his hippie harem became the talk of the underground Hollywood drug scene. Charlie was soon rubbing elbows with many of Tinseltown's elite, who were fascinated by his music and exotic lifestyle. The girls were wholly dedicated to having their mentor become a musical success and would dangle themselves like candy before a host of noted young record producers. This tactic generated an avalanche of promises, but only a handful of recordings.
There's a time for living. The time keeps on flying. Think you're loving, baby, and all you're doing is crying. Can you feel? Ah, the feeling's real. Look at your game, girl.
Manson's haunting compositions would attract the interest of some of the music industry's top stars. Many would choose to borrow elements of his sound and style, yet none would help to launch him as a performer. Despite his growing resentment of music industry methodology, Charlie remained a solid hit with the local Hollywood party scene, and before long had acquired many new traveling companions, including Diane Lake, Catherine Gypsy Cher, Leslie Van Houten, Kitty Lutzinger, Nancy Pittman, and the fiercely devoted Sandra Good. Several of these girls were also followers of another charismatic young musician named Bobby Beausoleil, whose boyish good looks had earned him the nickname Cupid. Although Manson had previously been reluctant to recruit male members, Beausoleil was allowed to join the group. Manson now felt that his ever-growing female legion would require more care and protection than he alone could provide. Soon Manson's chance meeting with hard-living rock drummer Dennis Wilson led to a close personal relationship. Wilson delighted in the constant sexual favors of Charlie's girls and gave the group the run of his home and many of his personal possessions. The association ended abruptly, however, when one of Charlie's songs appeared uncredited on the Beach Boys' 2020 album. In the course of their travels, the group would pause to deliver Mary Bruner's child by Manson, who would dub the boy Pooh Bear. Due to the influx of new members, the cramped, road-weary school bus was no longer an ideal home for this youthful band of nomads. Having heard of a local wrangler who could repair the ailing bus, Manson paid a visit to his place of employment, the Spahn Ranch. This once popular Western movie locale had become a virtual ghost town, with only a portion of the property still in use as a horse rental service. The tall canyons and natural streams that bordered the ranch created the illusion of complete and natural isolation, though suburban Chatsworth was only minutes away. Manson's mind reeled at the prospect of settling his family in this remote and spacious squatter's paradise. To make matters more ideal, the resident owner, George Spahn, was 81 years old and legally blind. Spahn agreed to let Manson and his clan move in turn would receive constant care and attention from the girls. To Manson's initial dismay, the sudden presence of dozens of scantily clad females on the premises brought several of Spahn's young hired hands into the fold. Soon, many of the male drifters the group had encountered on the road would turn up as well. Among these were Bruce Davis, Steve Grogan, Paul Watkins, Brooks Poston, and the young man who would later be the group's chief assassin, Charles Tex Watson. The addition of this decidedly rowdier element would make unwelcome demands on Manson, who had grown accustomed to the girls' unqualified adulation. Now the age-old tribal right of maintaining his stature among his own gender would later compel him to display unnatural courage in several volatile situations. During the first months, life at the Spahn Ranch had been an idyllic celebration of complete freedom and sharing. Each day, the girls would prepare communal meals made from the discarded produce of nearby supermarkets. Being that this remote rustic setting was devoid of societal restrictions, drug experiments and open sexuality became the chief entertainments of the group. Hence many births would occur in the months that followed, including yet another son for Manson himself by way of Sandra Good. Manson took exceptional pride in his ragtag band of outcasts. Unable to live within the confines of ordinary society, they had successfully created a world of their own. And although he had once been a faceless, voiceless member of a gray-clad human herd, he now found his every thought, every vision, eagerly devoured by his faithful young followers. To amuse them, Manson would often spin tales of revolution and society's violent end. The group continued to grow, and the inclusion of several members of the Straight Satan motorcycle gang made possible many nefarious methods for generating communal funds. With monumental profits pouring in from daily car thefts and drug sales, Manson had soon abandoned his vow to walk the straight and narrow, and 2 subsequent events would set into motion the collapse of Charlie's world. In June of 1969, naive Texas-born Charles Watson became entangled in a precarious dope transaction with a black Los Angeles drug lord. When vicious threats against the Spahn Ranch girls were leveled, Manson would intervene, and after a tense standoff, a scuffle would ensue, and Charlie shot his foe with a buntline revolver. Manson was furious with Watson over having been drawn into a shooting incident and told the cowering young Texan, "Now you owe me one." Although the drug lord had only been wounded during the dispute, by pure chance the next day's newspaper reported the local murder of a prominent Black Panther figure. Manson was particularly unnerved by the item, having spent time in prison with many black militants, whom he regarded extremely tough and dangerous. He recalled their boasts of stockpiling arms in the ghettos for an impending revolution, and feared bloody reprisals on his Spahn Ranch family. A wave of paranoia swept through the residents of the ramshackle ranch, and for a while the usual evening frolics were exchanged for weapon handling seminars and lookout duties. It was in this desperate atmosphere of unfounded fear and dread that the Manson tribe would graduate to its most damnable deeds. Gary Hinman was a 34-year-old music teacher who had been a steady supplier of drugs to the Manson family. When Bobby Beausoleil discovered that a high-priced purchase of the hallucinogenic mescaline was of a decidedly low quality, he took 2 of the girls to Hinman's Topanga Canyon home to demand a refund. Hinman became troublesome and was subdued and threatened by the trio for hours, to no avail. Beausoleil eventually called Manson and requested that he aid in settling the matter. Upon Charlie's arrival, Hinman expressed relief, assuming that his tormentors would now be called off. To convince the stubborn Hinman that paying his debt would be the wiser course of action, Manson resorted to bravado. He split Hinman's ear with a small sword and hurriedly left. The girls attended to Gary's wound and fed him, though the frustrated Beausoleil would soon begin a new cycle of unproductive threats. When the standoff ended its second day, nerves were frayed all around, and due to his now delirious state, Hinman suddenly began struggling and screaming for help. Reacting with a savage impulse, Beausoleil then descended on his hostage and fatally stabbed him. In desperation, the group would employ a gruesome device to help mislead authorities. The words "political piggy" were scrawled on the wall in blood, along with a panther paw symbol, to suggest the murder was the work of black militants. The girls then returned to the ranch while Beausoleil headed north in his victim's car. He was promptly arrested in the stolen vehicle and was soon being held as a murder suspect. Manson became frantic when he learned of the Hinman murder. He knew that soon investigators would link Beausoleil with the Spahn Ranch group, and his return to prison would be inevitable. Distraught over Bobby's capture and the incessant brooding of their leader, the girls devised a wicked plan, the committing of a random, look-alike murder, bearing all the same grisly elements, would undoubtedly bring about Beausoleil's release. Manson approved the scheme and selected Susan Atkins, who had been present at Hinman's murder, Patricia Krenwinkel, and newcomer Linda Kasabian to carry it out. Because he owed a debt of sorts to Manson, Tex Watson was appointed as leader of this drug-soaked death squad. The last hurdle would be the selection of an ideal murder site. Both Watson and Manson recalled a secluded, sprawling estate in Benedict Canyon, where they had visited Doris Day's record-producing son, Terry Melcher, some months before. They knew the current residents were certain to be high-profile Hollywood types that would generate a great deal of press attention. Manson instructed the girls to do whatever Tex told them. And with that, the youthful band of assassins slipped into the night. Sharon Tate was a lovely 26-year-old actress who had rapidly risen through the Hollywood ranks. She appeared in a succession of well-received offbeat films, including the classic horror spoof, The Fearless Vampire Killers.
Who says vampires are no laughing matter? They certainly are. Two men on a vampire hunt. Simple? They certainly are.
Sharon would soon marry the film's eccentric Polish director, Roman Polanski, who had created a cinematic sensation with his eerie, satanic tale, Rosemary's Baby. By August 8th of 1969, Tate was 8 months pregnant with Polanski's child and spending a quiet evening in the company of friends. With Polanski in England on business, Sharon had invited ex-boyfriend Jay Sebring to keep her company. Sebring was an internationally known hairdresser to the stars, who was no stranger to the Hollywood fast lane. Also visiting that evening was Abigail Folger, the coffee heiress, and her virtual gigolo companion, Wojtek Frykowski, a known drug supplier to the industry in-crowd. Upon arriving at the tranquil scene, Watson carefully clipped the phone wire outside the gate and led the girls up an embankment that would give them easy access to the grounds. In the driveway, they encountered 18-year-old Steve Parent as he prepared to leave after a visit with the guest house resident, groundskeeper William Garretson. Watson rushed Parent's vehicle, and through the window he shot and slashed the helpless teenager to death. Having officially begun the bloody spree, Watson ordered Linda Kasabian to stand lookout near the gate, while the others eagerly proceeded to the main house. There they found Wojtek Frykowski napping on a flag-draped sofa. He was hastily awakened and bound up, and when he inquired of his captor, "Who are you?" Watson hissed, "I am the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." The girls gathered Folger, Tate, and Sebring from other rooms in the house and led them to Watson, who attempted to truss them with rope from an overhead wooden beam. When Sebring protested on pregnant Sharon's behalf, Watson instantly shot him, setting off a panic in which Frykowski and Folger struggled furiously with the knife-wielding girls. Frykowski battled his way to the front porch, where Watson shot, bludgeoned, and stabbed him repeatedly until he expired on the lawn. Only yards away, Folger, too, had made a courageous break for freedom, but had been tackled and stabbed by Patricia Krenwinkel. Watson then joined Krenwinkel to aid in the killing of Folger. In the wake of this bloody pandemonium, a calm had now settled over the estate, and the killers re-entered the house to find Sharon Tate frantically pleading to Susan Atkins to spare the life of her unborn child. Instead, the heartless Atkins held her while the murderous monster Watson engaged in the night's final atrocity. In keeping with their plan, Atkins smeared the word pig on the front door in Sharon's blood before the group departed for the ranch. Upon arriving, they gave Manson a full report of the night's activities, and all retired to a sound sleep, except the haunted Manson, who feared this was too sloppy a job to suit their purpose. The following night, he would personally direct a death squad to its target and supervise the affair. On the night of August 9th, Manson would randomly select the home of grocer Lino LaBianca and his wife Rosemary as the next scene of mayhem. Manson led Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten into the house and instructed them to bind the hands of the frightened couple. To calm them, Manson offered assurances that they wouldn't be harmed, then hastily departed to allow Watson and the girls to begin their grisly task. The brutality and carnage that followed was reminiscent of the Tate slayings in every respect, with the additional gruesome element of Mr. LaBianca's corpse bearing the word war carved into the flesh of his belly next to a large protruding fork. Yet to the chagrin of the perpetrators of this senseless series of killings, the police perceived no immediate link to the murders of Hinman, Tate, and LaBianca. In a short 2-year period, Charles Manson had managed to completely betray the peace-loving ideal of his spiritual birthplace, and was now a crazed, desperate figurehead to a clinging, murderous mob. Part 2 of our story explores Manson's exodus to Death Valley, his capture and trial. We'll also examine the fate of his past followers and the phenomenon of his present ones. The mysterious murder of Sharon Tate and her companions on August 8, 1969, caused a flood of fear in the Hollywood community. The sales of padlocks, guard dogs, and security systems skyrocketed overnight. In the press, theories abounded and many false leads would be widely publicized, further complicating the investigation process by police. The first suspect to be questioned would be the occupant of the guest house, William Garretson, who claimed he heard no screams or gunshots emanating from the main house that night. Sharon's husband, Roman Polanski, hurried home from his trip abroad and made an emotional statement to the press.
The house is open now. The police has released it. And you can go and see the orgy place. You will see innumerable books about natural birth, which she was planning. And I was hurrying home because apparently I had to go to some kind of school with her. I never understood what it was, but I had to be present at these lessons or whatever it was. But I was going along with anything she said.
Due to the confirmed drug use and rumored decadence of victims Frykowski and Sebring, the tabloids had a field day speculating as to the true nature of the savage crimes. Sharon Tate, who on film had repeatedly portrayed the epitome of despoiled innocence, would now be remembered as a classic case of life imitating art. Her funeral was lavish and attended by a Hollywood who's who. As a fitting final tribute to her image as a pop goddess, Sharon was buried in a designer miniskirt. Meanwhile, little progress was being made by investigators, who initially dismissed the LaBianca murders as the work of a copycat killer.
Actually, the homicides are not connected. I think the public and a lot of the media picked out the fact that they were similar in nature, possibly because of the blood and the inscriptions. But this is rather a common type of thing in homicides. We've had many cases before where the suspect is written in blood or in lipstick or various things of that nature.
Soon, Hollywood paranoia was so great that when the father of a popular singing quartet, the Lennon Sisters, was mysteriously murdered in an unrelated incident, screen magazines hurriedly dubbed the collective slayings the Tate-Lennon murders. It was during this period of wild speculation, only 1 week after the brutal slayings, that a remarkable coincidence would occur. A newspaper headline would, once again, ponder the popular question, who killed Sharon Tate? Unbeknownst to all, the answer was very near. In the next column, a smaller article reported the arrest of a gang of suspected auto thieves. Acting upon a series of complaints regarding the unkempt residents of Spahn Ranch, a massive police raid was executed, and the entire group rounded up and arrested. As would often be the case, Charles Manson was the last to be captured and booked. However, the whole affair was little more than an inconvenience to the group, who would be released within 48 hours due to an improper search procedure by police. With the authorities now routinely monitoring the Spahn Ranch activities, Manson decided the ranch had become too hot for comfort. He also knew that one of the traits that his suburban-born followers had found most intriguing was his insistence on remaining an essentially natural being. His regard for the ways of animals, his adherence to a vegetarian diet, and his non-dependence on plug-in luxuries were emulated by the group. Manson would now put their hardy pioneer spirits to the ultimate test and move them to the hostile, barren environment of the Death Valley desert. Previous to the planned exodus, Manson had secured permission to use an abandoned desert ranch from its owner, Arlene Barker, by trading a Beach Boys gold record that he had been given during his friendship with Dennis Wilson. The move from Spahn Ranch would not be without incident, however. A ranch hand, Donald Shorty Shea, who Manson was certain had initiated the police raid that ultimately made life intolerable in his macabre kingdom, mysteriously vanished. The journey to the sun-bleached sands of Barker Ranch was made caravan style, in a fleet of dune buggies and a school bus. The first days in the new setting were filled with adventure and wonderment, as Charlie and his troop would explore the desert terrain, observing its odd creatures and marveling at its mysteries. However, this field trip atmosphere would soon give way to the realities of blistering heat and dwindling provisions, and several of the girls would soon register disenchantment with the monotony of their new surroundings. In an effort to revitalize family morale, Manson would direct the group in what he perceived to be an act of eco-terrorism, the ritual burning of an unmanned earth-moving machine that belonged to the Death Valley Park Service. This endeavor would only serve to step up Manson's impending capture, as furious rangers now decided to investigate the reports of a strange band of desert-dwelling hippies in the area. Meanwhile, Manson found himself in a more desperate spot than ever. He sensed that several of the lesser members of his tribe were prepared to defect, carrying with them varying degrees of knowledge as to the murderous misdeeds of August 1969. When Manson resorted to issuing threats and frequent displays of tyrannical rage, several of the group escaped to a nearby town and told the sheriff of their leader's descent into cruelty and madness. Once again, a major raid took place, with rangers and police rounding up the Barker Ranch gang. Manson was the last to be captured, having taken refuge in a tiny cabinet beneath the bathroom sink. When stolen vehicles were found on the property, the group was transferred to Indio County Jail for booking. During a routine interview there, Susan Atkins would display a perverse delight in tossing off cryptic references to the Tate murders. She was quickly transferred to Los Angeles, where she stunned authorities by happily recounting the details of the slayings in a nonchalant, breezy fashion. This news hit the national press like a bombshell and brought eventual murder charges against each of the Tate LaBianca slayers, as well as ringleader Charles Manson. Along with Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten would be the first to stand trial for murder. At the time, the most bloodthirsty member of the group, Charles Watson, was being held in his native Texas and was initially spared prosecution by a lengthy extradition battle. Vincent Bugliosi, the chief prosecutor in the case, had found an ideal ally in Linda Kasabian. Kasabian, who had acted as a lookout on the night of the Tate slayings, was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony against her former associates. Bugliosi knew that in order to get a conviction for Manson, he would have to prove that he was the absolute architect and director of the Tate LaBianca murders. He sought out several of the frightened and disillusioned ex-members of the group and interviewed each at length. From this vast pool of information, Bugliosi would construct for the jury a portrait of a paranoiac, antisocial tyrant who was intent on igniting a race war and believed the British music group the Beatles were sending him hidden messages through their music.
Well, this was a definition of Helter Skelter that Charlie gave. Now, if you look at this White album, it's a Beatles album. There are many other songs. One of them is called Sexy Sadie. Sadie Glutz, also known as Susan Atkins, whatever you want to call her, she thought that the Beatles named this song after her. There's also a song called Piggies. There's also a song...
What is it in the Helter Skelter song?
Nothing particularly in that song right there, except the definition that Manson gave of it. There's another song in that same album called Blackbirds, talking about blackbirds fixing their wings and rising up. Charles Manson said the blackbird meant the black man.
Various elements of the public reacted differently to the strange tales that were abounding. For the hippies, the nonviolent purveyors of peace and love, every dismal revelation of the trial would sound a distinct death knell for their movement. Ironically, mainstream America was just beginning to lay aside many of its misgivings about the flower children. For years, hippies had been depicted by film and television as a comical and thoroughly harmless entity. However, the infamous cover of Life magazine, coupled with the sensational daily accounts of drug use and murder, would send a collective chill through the suburbs of America, and suddenly hippies weren't cute anymore. Manson was now viewed by the hippie movement as the guy who spoiled the party. On the other hand, young extremists and radicals generally viewed the Manson trial as the governmental railroading of a bold social reformer. Underground newspapers and comics would portray Manson as a visionary, a philosopher, and a martyr. The well-circulated Legion of Charlie's comic ran panels paralleling the Tate murders to the Vietnam massacre at My Lai and expressed satirical outrage at the system's handling of each. Head shops sold a variety of pro-Manson items, some comparing his plight with that of Jesus Christ. A collection of his recordings made exactly 1 year prior to the Tate slayings was distributed as well, bearing a graphic which openly mocked the famed Life magazine cover. But the overwhelming reaction of the general public was one of universal fear and distaste. The still loyal members of the Manson clan would keep a curbside vigil outside the courthouse, occasionally causing a circus-like atmosphere to prevail. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, news reporters feverishly struggled for a glimpse of or statement from the accused.
I don't accept the whole situation. You know, like I was in the desert minding my business. This confusion belongs to you. It's your confusion. I don't have any confusion. I don't have any guilt. I know what I've done, and no man can judge me. I judge me.
What have you done, Charlie?
I've stayed in the desert and run with the coyotes and ate off the plants and found out you could live out there without this society. And that's where I'd like to go live, you know. But you won't let me go, will you?
You don't know anything of society?
Pardon?
You don't know anything of society now?
Owe him anything? I've paid him 22 years of my life. You know, I'm the other end of your society. You know, so you can ride your bicycles and do your thing. I live in your reform schools and your orphanages. I'm not against you. I'm not against you. Huh?
Are you bitter?
Bitter? No.
But you feel you've paid some price so far in your life.
Price?
To society, you said it.
Yeah, okay.
Does that make you bitter?
I don't know what that means.
How do you feel right now? Do you feel good feelings towards the judge?
I feel a little nervous. A little nervous. I feel good feelings towards everything. I feel no bad. I know no bad.
Okay, gentlemen, that's about it.
As the trial progressed, there would be countless disruptions, the most notable being the highly publicized mid-trial sentiment expressed by then-President Richard Nixon that Manson was guilty. This statement would create havoc in the court when Manson sprang from his seat and revealed the headline to the jury. The underground press had a field day, and the trial was delayed while each juror testified that the president's statement would not influence their decisions. As the outlook for the defendants grew increasingly bleak, Manson employed physical symbols to reflect his ordeal. He slashed an X into his forehead and declared that he had X'd himself from society. The remaining Manson clan, both inside the courtroom and out, would immediately do the same. Later, Manson would shave his head to illustrate his role as a condemned man, and again his devotees would follow suit. These last desperate acts to generate attention to their plight would not serve the group, however, and after a landmark, year-long trial, the defendants were all found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. Upon his eventual extradition to Los Angeles, Charles Watson, too, would be convicted and given a death sentence. A subsequent court action addressing the disappearance and suspected murder of Spawn Ranch wrangler Donald Shorty Shea would result in the conviction of two more family members, Bruce Davis and Steve Grogan. In the years that followed, Manson would serve time in many of the nation's most noted correctional facilities. Being an old hand at prison procedure, he quickly settled in and began an endless string of candid interviews with a still curious press.
It's like this. A guy comes up to you and he's called the district attorney. He's got all these guys and he handcuffs you and he sets you down. And he says, you're going to play this game whether you want to play it or not. So they start dealing out cards. And they deal you hippie cult leader, You don't know what a hippie cult leader is. There's never been a hippie cult leader. So you got to go find out what a hippie cult leader is. You know, you say, all right, I got a hippie cult leader card. I got 9 murder cards. I'm supposed to be responsible for making all these people do all these things. I'm supposed to have this awesome power to move people to destruction and have the power of the presidency that I can put troops in the field and have them go out and fight and die and take other people's lives for me. I'm a whole government by myself, convicted to be that. It's like I told the judge, I know, God knows, and the Holy Spirit knows. And what you're selling down in the marketplace, your children are going to have to work that off. So I would suggest you not sell them a whole bunch of lies, you know, but they continue to sell that damn helter-skelter trip that had nothing to do with me. You go to court in this country, and it says they're not interested in why you did it, they're interested in if you did it. But why you did it should be an issue also. Why are the children doing what they're doing? Why does a child reach up and kill his mom and dad and murder his 2 little sisters and then cut his throat? You know, why would a child do something like that? Because we're not raising it upright. We're programming it poorly. Our TVs are murdering people every 15 minutes. You see 2 or 3 people dying on TV. To the generation of the 60s and the 70s, well, the TV's raising the children. The TV's their mom and dads. Now, I'm going to tell you something that you're not going to like, and probably the world ain't going to like, but I'll tell it to you just like it is. I was raised to ride my own beef. If I do something, I'm responsible for my own actions. If I bust somebody in the mouth, I'll stand up to that. I won't back off of that. If it means my life, I will give my life for my principle. It's that simple. If I wanted to, had it been me up in this Sharon Tate's house, it would have been a lot worse. Thank God that your children did it for you, and I didn't get started on it, because if I'd have got started on it, it would have been a lot worse than it was. And I would be justified in doing it if I did it with my life, and I gave my life for that, just like those children did. The dispensation of truth is not a difficult thing, and most children can understand it. If you're willing to give your life for something, you go and you pick up your uniform, you get your M16, you put your helmet on, and you get in that jungle, and you do what your country tells you to do. If you don't, then there's nothing, you're not there. There's nothing to you. Because all a man is honor. If he has no honor and he has no truth, he has no faith, he has no trust, what is he? He's a jellyfish, you know. But this country is overprotective of his people. It's always, in other countries I haven't found this to be so, but in this country, they don't want you to do this because they're afraid it'll hurt you. Come on. They're afraid it'll hurt you. That's like mother saying, don't climb the tree, you might fall and hurt yourself. Well, she might fall and hurt herself because she couldn't climb the tree. But you're a kid, you can climb the tree. You see what I'm saying? In other words, the older people have always put their values off on the younger people. And it's just the same old process that it's been since time began. The younger people keep throwing it off. And that's what the kids did down there in L.A. They threw that all off of them. They wanted to get their brother out of jail.
In 1972, California abolished the death penalty, thus reducing the sentences of the Tate LaBianca slayers to life imprisonment. With the prospect of parole before them, Susan Atkins and Charles Watson each proclaimed their spiritual salvation at every turn.
About the change that has taken place in our life, about what Christ Jesus can do to a person and saving that person and healing that person from the inside out.
Do you recall who stabbed who?
Yes, I recall basically who stabbed who.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I could. As the records show, I did shoot Steve Parent when I went into the estate. I did stab Jay Sebring after he was shot by myself. As far as me taking the lead role, I was the male at the crime. But at that time I did not consider myself a leader. I considered myself more of a follower. Charles Manson in carrying out his orders.
Charles Watson would be allowed to marry while in prison and was granted routine conjugal visits with his new bride. In this manner, the one-time cruel and savage fiend who had disallowed Sharon Tate her right to motherhood has become the proud father of 3. Perpetually outraged by the lenient treatment of her daughter's killers, Doris Tate has waged a tireless personal campaign to keep Atkins and Watson behind bars. Her emotional testimony at each of their parole hearings has proven quite effective to date, despite a mind-boggling recent development in which the daughter of Charles Watson's victim, Rosemary LaBianca, announced that she had faith in his alleged reformation and would like to see him freed. In addition to the inevitable autobiographies by those directly associated with Manson, over the years there have been a multitude of other diverse and bizarre literary impressions of the case. The published love letters of a longtime pen pal, a portrait of the Manson women by a female therapist who states they have only themselves to blame, a maudlin plea for Christian forgiveness by the wife of a Manson juror, and the thoroughly absurd crackpot theory alleging that Manson was one of a number of satanic hitmen linked to the New York murders of David, son of Sam Berkowitz. The grisly revelations made during the sensational Manson trial also generated a rash of exploitation films depicting maniacal gurus directing teenagers in orgies of lust and murder. Some of the films would go so far as to make specific references to the Tate slayings in their promotional campaigns. Eventually, television and even theater would cash in on the Manson phenomenon, and by the mid-1970s, the entertainment market had been well saturated with tales of Charlie and his followers. Without the promise of new developments, the material was becoming too familiar to audiences. Perhaps it was the fear that the interest in the Manson cause would die without a fresh headline that prompted ever-loyal Lynette Squeaky Fromm to action. In 1975 in Sacramento, Fromm would capture national attention by pointing a handgun at President Gerald Ford.
The president came down the walk and everyone was shaking his hand, and he came up to me and he shook my hand, and all of a sudden he grabbed away, and all of a sudden the Secret Service men were on this girl that was standing 2 people away from me. The girl standing next to me fell to the ground, and the next thing I know, they were rushing the president off, and they had in custody this girl that had supposedly had a concealed weapon in her purse.
There was no shot fired?
No shot fired.
I saw a hand coming up behind several others in the front row, and obviously there was a gun in that hand. I then saw almost instantaneously very quick and very effective action by the Secret Service in taking care of the matter.
Fromm would again make news on Christmas Eve 1987 with a 48-hour escape from the Alderson prison in West Virginia. Her role as chief spokesman for the Manson clan has changed little over the years. She's one of the most vocal champions of Charles Manson's grassroots environmental movement, ATWA, dedicated to the preservation of air, trees, water, and animals. In recent months, longtime Manson devotee Sandra Good has been the driving force behind a valiant fight to save Vermont's Lake Champlain from the ravages of paper mill toxins. It is perhaps difficult to imagine that ecological awareness would be a chief concern of a man who has spent 3/4 of his life in cages of concrete and steel. Yet it is precisely this enigmatic nature that has made Charles Manson a source of endless fascination to broadcasters, the press, and the public alike. By the 1980s, a new wave of youth culture had blossomed in America, more irreverent than ever and often content to view Manson as a political prisoner or a folk hero. A generation who had never responded with shock and horror to the news of the Tate murders could now happily pursue Manson's image in trendy novelty shops on a variety of items. Buttons, gum cards, records, posters, and especially T-shirts. Weekly supermarket tabloids have also repeatedly explored Manson's legacy on both factual and highly dubious terms. And in the modern-day art community, Manson's mythos abounds in innumerable works, many of which depict him as a classically heroic figure. But the artwork that is most prized among the new cult of Manson admirers is that of Manson himself, whether it be bootleg recordings of his music made in his prison cell, or sketches and colorful string art figures made from the yarn in his socks.
It's play a game like a game I'm playing each day. I got 1,000 years on the tears of fears keep crying from my convict's mind and your way. And it goes just to say, better get on board.
To this day, the whereabouts of many of the original Manson family members is a profound mystery. We know, however, that some went on to further adventures. Some choose to remain reclusive. One has died of cancer, and to date, one convicted murderer has been paroled. Curiously, Charles Manson has adopted the swastika as his personal symbol of harmony and perfect order, though his surroundings of the past 20 years have provided little of either. In the press, Manson has remained the yardstick by which all evil is measured, a hypnotic seducer of souls, a relentless destroyer of wills. Perhaps therein lies the element we fear most about Charles Manson. He, like no other murderous menace, invites us to fear ourselves. Yet there exists in the annals of true crime two men who, by the nature of their despicable deeds, have proven worthy of the unique and ghastly label of ghoul. Edward Gein and John Wayne Gacy. While their names may not be as familiar as those of Charles Manson, Richard Speck, or Ted Bundy, these two murderous Midwesterners have combined to carve the most twisted, horrific, and spine-tingling legacy in the history of modern crime. Edward Gein was born on August 8, 1906, was brought up in a strict religious household, and was taught from an early age that hard work was the ultimate virtue, and that women were the supreme pariahs of sin. Gein's father was a farmer and part-time tanner who moved the family to Plainfield, Wisconsin, and began working sun-up to sundown on his 160-acre field, leaving Edward's mother to become the seminal influence on his developing years. She taught Edward, among other things, that God was planning to destroy the world because women wore lipstick. She also insisted that Edward and his brother Henry never marry, instilling in both an irrational hatred of what she termed scarlet women. As a result, Gein's view of the opposite sex and his own nascent sexuality was irrevocably twisted and confused. From an early age, in fact, he had fantasies of becoming a woman. He even considered amputating his penis on several occasions to achieve this end. Edward was 36 when his father died in 1940, and 4 years later a Wisconsin forest fire claimed the life of brother Henry. But Gein's mother battled 2 strokes before finally succumbing in 1945, leaving her son to tend to the farm all by himself. As the rest of the country celebrated the Allies' victory in World War II, Edward did something else entirely. He sealed off his mother's bedroom, acquired several books on female anatomy, and began studying them with a clinically obsessive interest. Ed's twisted fascination with the female form would soon erupt when he noticed the neighbor woman's name in the local obituary column. That night he drove to the graveyard and dug up her lifeless body. He then eagerly returned home, positioned the corpse in his bed, and after almost 40 years of celibacy, thusly began his first intimate acquaintance with the female gender. Gein found the corpse so sexually stimulating that he ended up eating parts of the body and making a waistcoat of the skin so he could wear it and become a woman whenever he wanted to. The highly publicized case of transsexual Christine Jorgensen no doubt inspired Gein to seek this tangible, albeit psychotic, process with which to satiate his inner longings. But Gein's accompanying cannibalistic tendencies soon necessitated the continued acquisition of fresh female cadavers. Gein began seeking odd jobs around Plainfield and soon teamed up with a dim-witted local farmer named Gus to grave rob after hours. Utilizing 3 local cemeteries, the fiendish duo opened an estimated 9 or 10 graves in their nocturnal raids. Often they would remove whole corpses, sometimes just bits and pieces. Gein told Gus that the female bodies they exhumed were needed for at-home experiments, and the older man obligingly helped Ed transport the corpses to a small shed on the Gein farm. Gus never knew what Gein did with the bodies, never asked, and never could have imagined the chillingly demented truth. Alone with a fresh new female corpse, Gein would first skin it and purposefully proceed to fashion a familiarly sickening vest of female flesh, complete with breasts and genitalia to wear over his own. Gein would then take the remaining body parts and, recalling his father's part-time tanning trade, create lampshades and wastebaskets out of human skin. But Gein's ghoulish imagination wouldn't stop there. He created knives with handles of human bone, bows made from inverted skull caps, and would utilize the remaining shards of human skin to upholster his kitchen chairs. After Gus was taken away to an old folks' home, Gein continued grave robbing on his own. But his increased appetite for human flesh, coupled with his growing inner torments, soon led him to scrutinize the living and covet their prized bodily parts. On December 8, 1954, Gein walked into a deserted saloon in Pine Grove, Wisconsin, pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and, without a word, shot 51-year-old bartender Mary Hogan in the head. He then dragged her lifeless form back to his farm, added her to his gruesome collection of victims, and literally cannibalized the remainder of her body for good measure. In search of his next victim, Gein walked into a Plainfield hardware store one day in November 1957. Standing behind the counter was the store's proprietor, 58-year-old Bernice Warden, talking with her son Frank, who was the town's deputy sheriff. Ed spent the next week stopping in at the hardware store, talking to both Bernice and Frank about the particulars of antifreeze, and in the process learned that Frank's deer hunting excursion was the following Saturday morning. At that time, with Bernice Warden alone in the store, Gein made his move. Walking over to a gun display, he pulled a .22 caliber rifle from the rack and inserted a single cartridge which he'd brought for this purpose. He then fired upon Bernice Warden, shooting her dead. When Frank Warden returned from his hunting trip, he found the hardware store locked. After breaking in, he not only discovered the cash register missing, but noticed disturbing traces of blood on the floor and a written receipt for antifreeze. Acting on the hunch, Warden went directly to the Gein farm. When he saw the farmhouse empty, he looked into the shed and discovered the naked, headless, disemboweled corpse of his mother hanging upside down from the rafters. The body had been dressed like a carcass in a butcher shop. Stunned, Warden and other Plainfield police authorities tracked Gein down and finally learned the grisly truth about the literal house of horrors that Edward Gein called home. Gaining entrance to the farmhouse at last, they discovered the most horrifying collection of artifacts any of them had ever seen. Gein's collection of skins in a cardboard box, Bernice Warden's severed head in another, a human heart in a frying pan on the stove waiting to be eaten, a tom-tom made from a coffee can and human skin, 9 death masks, all of women, with portions of hair and scalp intact, and several of his infamous waistcoats. All told, the gruesome remains added up to at least 15 bodies. Arrested and formally charged with murder, Gein confessed to the 2 killings, acknowledged his instances of body snatching, but defiantly insisted that he wasn't a robber. "I took that cash register," he explained, "because I wanted to see how it worked." On January 16, 1958, a judge found Gein criminally insane. He was immediately sent to Central State Hospital in Waupun, Wisconsin. A full decade later, in November 1968, Gein's case was ordered up for trial. Judge Robert Goldmar found Gein innocent by reason of insanity and returned him to the insane asylum. But Gein's legacy continued on. Local teens began to swap tasteless Ed Gein jokes, which soon swept the country. On March 30th, 1958, an auction of Ed Gein's less ghoulish possessions took place. But when suggestions of turning the property into a macabre tourist attraction were heard, the Gein farm soon mysteriously burned to the ground. Though Ed Gein died in 1984, his horrific habits have been immortalized time and again in motion pictures, some of which have become classics of the horror genre.
This young man, you had to feel sorry for him. After all, being dominated by an almost maniacal woman was enough to drive anyone to the extreme of, well, let's go in. Well, they've cleaned all this up now. Big difference. You should have seen the blood. The whole place was, well, it's too horrible to describe. Dreadful. And I'll tell you, there's a very important clue was found here. Down there. Well, the murderer, you see, crept in here very slowly. Of course, the shower was on, there was no sound. And
what happened was true. The most bizarre and brutal series of crimes in America. This is the movie that is just as real, just as close, just as terrifying as being there. Even if one of them survives, what will be left? The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. After you stop screaming, you'll start talking about it.
Well, this article here covers quite a bit of it, and of course tells a lot of the facts. The bizarre truth behind the man who inspired Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, they've got some photos in here, how he made, what he made the skin, what he did with the skin. Oh, it is weird, I'll tell you. I remember, you know, living in Chicago. I remember hearing about it when it happened back in '57. But, you know, he died here in '84 at the Mendota Mental Hospital, because he lived up in Wisconsin there.
It is perhaps more than a mere coincidence that the only man in criminal history whose twisted deeds are comparable to those of Ed Gein would harbor an intense fascination with the Gein saga. Yet John Wayne Gacy would go on to achieve the ultimate ghoulish goal by maintaining a well-stocked personal graveyard beneath the floorboards of his suburban home. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, and grew up amidst an incendiary family atmosphere of anger, fear, and outright violence. His father, a Polish immigrant, was an out-of-control alcoholic whose frustrations and disappointments with life seemed to find their only outlet in abuse toward his child. Gacy Jr. retreated into a world of physical and psychological hypochondria, constantly complaining of stomach pains and heart palpitations. Here, John Gacy reflects on his difficult Chicago childhood.
Well, I know you can always heal old wounds. I know with my dad, I never got along with him while he was alive. I never could please him. And of course, with him drinking and his Jekyll and Hyde routine when he drank, he was a son of a bitch. You know, and I just kind of stayed away from it as much as possible. But he always said you'd never amount to anything and you're dumb and stupid and all that, you know. So I went out and made my own way. But he died at the age of 69. Of course, I had older parents, too. My dad was almost 40 when he got married. He was 38. My mother was 30 when they got married. So you can tell there's a great gap in age difference. My dad was 40 years older than I was. So it's hard to sometimes relate to that, especially he come from the old country. You know, from Poland, and headstrong. And you just didn't argue with him.
After completing high school, Gacy went to business college, graduated to take a job at a shoe store, and out to prove his father wrong, quickly established himself as one of the hardest working shoe salesmen in the operation. But Gacy's stunted psychological growth continually fueled a desperate inner need to be liked and appreciated. In addition, Gacy was a habitual liar, constantly boasting of his physical and mental abilities in a hopeless attempt to erase the debilitating effects of John Gacy Sr.'s criticisms from his memory. Although his personal psychology was relatively unhealthy, Gacy nevertheless convinced one of his co-workers, a young woman from Waterloo, Iowa, to marry him. Shortly thereafter, Gacy and his new wife moved to the small Iowa town where Gacy took the reins of his in-laws' family business, a modest fried chicken establishment, and started raising a family, a son and a daughter. Gacy instantly won the admiration of his Iowa business peers with his no-nonsense approach to business, putting in long hours and contributing his time and money to the Junior Chamber of Commerce. But Gacy's hard-won image of conscientiousness and normality was shattered completely in May of 1968, when he was arrested by local police for coercing one of his teenage restaurant employees to perform homosexual acts with him. When the charges appeared to be backed by substantial evidence, Gacy hired a youthful ne'er-do-well to attack the prosecution's star witness, but the plan backfired, and Gacy was additionally charged with obstruction of justice. Sent to an Iowa penitentiary on a 10-year sentence, Gacy saw his marriage fall apart while behind bars. But he vowed to amend his criminal actions by becoming a model prisoner, and was rewarded with a release from prison a short 18 months after his conviction. Moving back to Chicago, where his criminal record would be less conspicuous, Gacy again put his nose to the grindstone, immersing himself in one business venture after another, before finally settling upon the lucrative building contracting trade. In 1972, Gacy repeated the pattern of his pre-criminal past, winning the heart of a young Chicago woman with his pragmatic outlook on life and his responsible work ethic. Marrying her, Gacy relocated to the suburbs of Chicago and again attempted to embrace the normal middle-class lifestyle that he'd always dreamed about. His aggressive gregariousness earned him the friendship of many of his neighbors and brought him a measure of celebrity when he'd put on colorful makeup, don a frilly costume, and entertain children's birthday parties as the wisecracking Pogo the Clown. But while his outward appearance was that of a straight-arrow member of the community, Gacy's complex and powerful inner urges would not be stifled. In 1972, Gacy began to prowl the gay district of Chicago on the nights his wife was away. He then lured young men to his suburban home with offers of free beer, magic demonstrations, and friendly games of pool. At a strategic point in the evening, Gacy would produce a pair of trick handcuffs, which he fastened and removed with ease. But when his guest playfully tried them on, they locked tight, and Gacy would expediently render his hapless prey unconscious and sexually assault him. Now driven by fear of being reported and once again imprisoned, Gacy would strangle the life from each subdued victim and bury them in the dark, damp crawl space beneath his home. By the mid-1970s, Gacy's victims numbered in the dozens, while his daytime persona of affability led him further and further up the social ladder. Gacy endeared himself to the Chicago caucus of the Democratic Party, and he was even photographed in 1978 with then First Lady Rosalind Carter. But in his desperate desire to impress, Gacy often faltered, occasionally crossing the line into outright fabrication. At one point, he had cards printed up identifying himself as a Democratic precinct captain, when Gacy was merely an active supporter in the party. Gacy had also begun taking an assortment of recreational drugs, which caused an increasingly violent temperament. This, coupled with his dwindling interest in his wife's affection, resulted in divorce in 1976. Now Gacy's murderous appetite shifted into high gear. His victims, once mostly streetwise hustlers, now included several teenagers who had worked for him. In a 2-month span in spring alone, at least 5 boys were sodomized, tortured, and murdered in Gacy's suburban house of horrors. When guests would complain about the rancid odor which emanated from the floor of the dwelling, Gacy would casually state that it was probably due to faulty plumbing. By October, the seeping crawl space was filled to overcapacity. Then on December 12, 1978, 15-year-old Robert Peast vanished from his Des Plaines, Illinois neighborhood after telling his mother that he was going to see a contractor about a summer job that paid $5 an hour. Alerted to the boy's disappearance, investigators noted that Gacy's construction firm had recently remodeled the drugstore where Peast had last been seen. Following up on the tip, Illinois police stopped by Gacy's home that evening to inquire about the case, and immediately noticed the foul stench emanating from beneath the structure's foundation. When they asked Gacy for an explanation, he gave them a rambling statement which aroused suspicion. Investigating further, authorities discovered the first of the crawl space bodies, kept on digging, and became more and more amazed, shocked, and disgusted at what they found. Discovering body after body, investigators leveled Gacy's home, tore up 2 driveways, and dismantled the garage in an attempt to completely catalog the wholesale carnage that Gacy had wrought. When they finally finished, 29 bodies were discovered on the property. 4 more were recovered from a nearby river, and John Wayne Gacy was arrested, charged, and convicted on all counts by a Cook County judge. Though Gacy sits on death row at the Menard Correctional Facility in Illinois, he is anything but an idle man, appearing tirelessly preoccupied with various methods of expression. He routinely corresponds with hundreds of persons, ranging from Christian ministers to well-known heavy metal musicians. In this pursuit, Gacy often displays his genius for manipulation, adapting the text of his letters to perfectly suit the personality of each reader. His replies can be tender and eloquent, with touches of sanctimonious self-pity, or coarse and mean-spirited, containing lewd poetry and pornographic cartoons. Despite the overwhelming evidence which convicted him, Gacy still maintains his innocence with a series of typed flyers he distributes by mail. He also wrote a mammoth autobiography entitled A Question of Doubt, which presents a cloudy string of alibis for the murders. However, no major publisher has deemed the rambling literary effort marketable in its present form. Perhaps more impressive is the craftsmanship Gacy displays in this fully articulated scale model of his now defunct murder house, constructed entirely from cigar boxes. But the one jailhouse venture from which John Gacy has achieved true notoriety is the sale of his sketches and paintings. Since announcing his entry into the field of art, Gacy has been commissioned to create graphics for everything from punk rock album jackets to illustration plates for books with extreme and unusual themes. Though fairly crude, Gacy's paintings have also proven quite popular as curios and conversation pieces, with many turning up in gallery shows nationwide. The notion that a sadistic killer could profit from his infamy created a firestorm of controversy in the press, with particular outrage expressed by the parents of Gacy's victims. A closer examination of Gacy's favorite art themes tend to reveal an often sardonic and cruel sense of humor on his part. One example being his Hi-Ho series, in which he depicts the classic Disney characters, the 7 dwarfs, marching through a variety of settings. The grotesquely rendered figures, happily returning from a dark abyss, with digging tools in hand, readily conjures images of the hellish crawl space which housed Gacy's many victims. Several other paintings in the Gacy collection are more shamelessly ghoulish, while still others are wholesome, respectable images designed to attract the more serious and discerning art customer. Gacy's most popular paintings of all are his self-portraits, in which he appears as his infamous clown creations, Pogo and Patches. Psychologists agree that the makeups Gacy devised for these traditionally cheerful characters instead reveal a deep-seated desire to instill terror in children. The departure from the standard, well-rounded eye and mouth shadows actually give his clowns a grim, menacing quality, reminiscent of a grinning death's head. By always placing his painted clowns in a forest setting, Gacy also lends a telling predatory quality to these creations. In 1991, a new warden at Menard Prison issued an order officially disallowing Gacy's artwork to be sold from the facility. Yet interest in the crude paintings and horrible crimes of John Wayne Gacy continues, as do motion picture incarnations of Wisconsin cannibal Ed Gein. It appears most certain that the uniquely horrific legacies of the ghouls, Gein and Gacy, will long haunt all who bear witness to their bloody handiwork. Murder in Tinseltown. It is the ultimate attention getter, prompting newspaper headlines, editorial tributes, and worldwide mourning among the movie-going public. But the dramatic collision of Hollywood glamour with the harsh reality of an untimely end has historically provoked intense speculation as well. Decades-old theories concerning the mysterious deaths of some of Hollywood's most beloved and radiant stars, such as Thelma Todd, Ramon Navarro, Ted Healy, and Salminia, have continued to fascinate movie fans to this day. And the murders of other legendary Hollywood figures, such as Johnny Stompanato, Bugsy Siegel, the Black Dahlia, and William Desmond Taylor, are the subject of similar timeless intrigue, adding ever-fascinating, continually puzzling, and endlessly compelling entries to the Hollywood police blotter. Hollywood has always been a place of narcissistic self-indulgence, but it was never more exciting, dynamic, and sinful a place than in the early 1920s. Although Prohibition effectively put a lid on the alcohol intake of mainstream America, the explosive new industry of movie making and its center of operations in Hollywood played by an entirely different set of rules. Bootleg liquor flowed like water, sexual escapades were the stuff of legend, and criminal justice continually flew in the face of conventional law and order, especially when it came to murder. Dashing English-born film director William Desmond Taylor, a former actor who claimed to have been an officer in the British Army, had emigrated to Hollywood amidst the gleeful turbulence of the times. Almost immediately, he became one of the top filmmakers of the silent film era and was elected president of the Motion Picture Directors Association. But one night, in November of 1922, alone in his bungalow court apartment in the Westlake district of Los Angeles, Taylor was surprised by an intruder, rose from his chair, and was shot twice in the back by a .38 caliber revolver. The investigation into the director's death uncovered a shadowy and scandalous private life, which appeared to involve other major film personalities. Popular screen comedienne Mabel Normand's career was ruined when evidence in Taylor's possession disclosed that she was a frequent cocaine user and heavy drinker. This being a strong contrast to her antiseptic girl-next-door screen persona. Mary Miles Minter, a sexy young actress with a potential for enduring stardom, also experienced a severe setback when a closet filled with exotic underwear was discovered in Taylor's bedroom, some conveniently bearing her initials, to the delight of gossip mongers. Eventually, speculation arose that the female apparel and other evidence discovered at the scene was actually a clever publicity smokescreen devised by studio heads to mask Taylor's discreet homosexual tendencies. To this day, some interesting theories abound, with Charlotte Shelby, the overprotective mother of Mary Miles Minter, being the prime suspect. Shelby had often heard rumors about Taylor's unconventional sexuality and was fearful that her daughter's frequent visits to his home were evidence of infatuation. One evening, Shelby grabbed a pistol and set out to confront the director at his bungalow. When she arrived, she found young Mary there and, unable to control her rage, fired the fateful shots. Allegedly, through political connections, Shelby was able to pay off the sitting district attorney to destroy telltale evidence of the case, sealing the true facts of William Desmond Taylor's death for several decades. But while Taylor's murder was the subject of incessant debate in Hollywood, equally puzzling to movie fans and criminal experts alike was the baffling death in 1935 of cinema superstar Thelma Todd. Todd was born in 1905, won the beauty contest title of Miss Massachusetts while still a teenager, and eventually became a school teacher. But when a friend sent Thelma's picture to Paramount production head Jesse Lasky, the powerful film executive quickly hired Todd to a long-term studio contract. Unlike many of her contemporaries of the silent era, Todd's pleasant speaking voice allowed for a smooth transition to the talkies.
Hey, Pete, show us your old corkscrew. Show us how you knock them out, huh?
Yeah, go on, Jim. Show us. Come on, all right, old boy. Well, I'll tell you just how it works, see? It all happened in a twinkling of an eye. I catches him coming in, see? And I nails him with the old reliable, just like this. Oh, geez, baby, hurt you?
Oh, no, do it again. I love it.
By the mid-1930s, Todd had made more than 70 films and was poised for superstardom at the tender age of 30. With finances at an all-time high, Thelma soon took residence in a luxury apartment overlooking her very own sidewalk cafe. On the night of her death, Todd attended a private party at the lavish Trocadero nightclub, but her friends became concerned when the ever-bright Hot Toddy appeared at times uncharacteristically morose. She abruptly left the night spot to keep a mysterious appointment at her own cafe at 2 a.m. In the early morning hours that followed, Thelma was spotted all about town with a variety of individuals. One companion was believed to be ruthless New York mobster Lucky Luciano. Strangely enough, Thelma had recently received several anonymous death threats, which police believed were a mob attempt to coax her into installing slot machines at her establishment. Todd's body was found in her garage at approximately 10 a.m. on December 16, 1935. Although an autopsy revealed substantial evidence of foul play, coroners ruled that Todd had died as a result of carbon monoxide poisoning. 2 years after Thelma Todd's untimely death came one of the most tragic and mysterious of all Hollywood passings, that of the legendary vaudevillian Ted Healy. Healy was born in 1896 in Kaufman, Texas, and originally harbored an ambition to be a businessman, until he discovered a talent for show business in general, and comedy in particular.
Let me tell you one thing, young fella. Listen here. You've thrown us out of the theater into the gutter, and you hit me on the head. Now you cross our name off the board. I'm warning you now. I'm warning you. Don't go too far. So what? We quit.
Using the signature prop of a comically crushed hat, Healy stormed music hall stages from coast to coast. By the mid-1920s, he'd become the biggest vaudeville star in history and was making $8,500 a week. In 1927, Healy brought his childhood friend Mo Howard into the act, casting him as a stooge with whom to bounce gags and jokes off of. The pairing was such an astonishing success that two other stooges, Curly Howard and Larry Fine, were added to the mix, and the Three Stooges were born.
How are you, boys?
Okay, I'll take scotch and soda.
You will, eh? None of that nonsense.
Oh, listen, I beg your pardon.
Because?
Please, I beg you. Is your name Ted Heel?
No, Ted Healy the name is, not Heel.
Oh, listen, did you originate stogies?
What?
Are you the first one that ever had stogies?
Say, pardon me, I want you to be a nice boy. When you're a nice boy, your fairy godmother always watches over you.
Your what?
Your fairy godmother always watches over you.
I got an uncle I'm not sure of.
None of that now. Go ahead. Let me hear more about that.
But
Now, go
I
ahead.
want to know. You know, I know. But I know how you make people laugh.
You do, huh?
Yes, I certainly.
How? Uh-huh. No, you're wrong, lady. She's wrong, isn't she?
Yeah, this is the way.
Take your time.
He's
kid.
wrong. This
Just
is the
relax
way.
yourself. Do that again. Do that again.
It took.
He's wrong.
Now, this is the way, isn't it? Okay. Pardon me this moment.
Who started this thing here? Wait a minute.
Come on,
kid.
Okay.
After a spectacularly successful career together, including the film Dancing Lady with Clark Gable and Joan Crawford, the Stooges ultimately left Healy to go out on their own in 1934.
Gentlemen, please try to be a little more quiet in the court.
Certainly, Judgy. The gate is locked.
Will you please step forward? No, no, no. Prepare yourself for the witness box.
Healy remained a permanent fixture on the American entertainment scene, however, and retained his title as one of the comedy titans of his era. But on December 21st, 1937, 2 days after the wildly successful premiere of his latest film, Hollywood Hotel, Healy suddenly and mysteriously died. The accounts of his abrupt demise were quite inconsistent. The trade paper Variety attributed Healy's death to a heart attack in his Beverly Hills home. But word quickly spread that Healy had actually perished as a result of head wounds suffered in a drunken brawl outside the Trocadero nightclub. Ted Healy's legacy of laughs would endure, however. The comic roughhousing pioneered by the King of Stooges became a timeless institution. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, who'd gotten his start in the New York mobs when he became a heroin dealer for Lucky Luciano, emigrated to the West Coast in the 1930s. With a little help from his old friend, George Raft. Raft, who'd grown up in the mob-controlled streets of New York only to become a Hollywood icon of the 1930s, was earning $4,000 a week when Siegel materialized in Hollywood. With Raft's help, Siegel subsequently developed several lucrative criminal rackets in the movie capital, including one which eventually gained total control of the Extras Consortium of Tinseltown. Siegel loved the glamour of Hollywood and found the spectacular parties and beautiful young starlets greatly to his liking. But as the 1940s began, his ambitions were centered on a patch of desert land 400 miles to the east of Los Angeles, in Las Vegas, Nevada. There, during Christmas week, 1946, Siegel opened the $6 million Flamingo Hotel and Casino. It was the first major construction on the Las Vegas Strip. Though the operation immediately began losing money, Siegel was determined to make it a success. And his obsessive attention toward this end caused him to forsake both Hollywood and his steady girlfriend, would-be actress Virginia Hill. Desperate to lure Hill back to Las Vegas in the summer of 1946, Siegel went to a rented mansion, a huge Moorish structure located in lavish Beverly Hills. And on the night of June 20th, as he sat alone in the immense palace, Siegel was brutally murdered by a group of hitmen. Subsequent police investigation was hampered by Siegel's tarnished reputation in the movie capital. While he had made many friends during his Hollywood years, he had made even more enemies. The most plausible suspects in Siegel's murder were also the most obvious, the investors in the floundering Flamingo Hotel, who were rumored to have hired hitmen to pay off the operation's debt with Siegel's life. As World War II ended and the era of post-war affluence began, Hollywood flexed its entertainment muscles and attracted would-be movie stars like bees to honey. A few managed to get a foot in the studio door, only to find that the screen test was the next hurdle to stardom.
I hope you'll overlook the fact that this test is being made on a rocking boat. I have no makeup on. It's nature in the raw. There's no lighting. The sound must be pretty bad, but remember that in a studio with proper lighting and a good makeup and some facilities for a screen test and one of Universal's excellent directors, I'll make a much nicer impression.
One such wannabe was a young woman from Massachusetts named Elizabeth Short. In life, Short was both impoverished and ignored by the Hollywood powers that be, and was finally forced into prostitution in order to pay her bills. But in death, Short became famous as the Black Dahlia, the centerpiece to one of the most violent and shocking murders in the annals of crime. Her lifeless body was discovered on the morning of January 15th, 1947, along a street in the Crenshaw district of Los Angeles. But what appalled investigators was the condition of her mutilated corpse. The body had been neatly severed into two horrific pieces. A sickening grin had been carved into her face, and every drop of blood had been systematically drained from her body. The moniker Black Dahlia was derived from Elizabeth Short's dynamic-looking black hair, which was teased into a striking bouffant. But Los Angeles detectives analyzing the case noted that Short's killer had carefully hennaed her hair red, cut a triangular piece of flesh from her thigh, which contained a tattooed design of a rose, and inserted the piece deep within her lifeless form after death. Investigators also concluded, after examining the utterly annihilated condition of Short's body, that she had been systematically tortured for 3 days prior to her murder. But despite one of the biggest manhunts in Los Angeles history, involving hundreds of city and county police officers and thousands of man-hours, the murderer of the Black Dahlia has never been found. As the 50s began, the sobering specter of television became a powerful presence in Hollywood, openly threatening the domination of movies in the American psyche. But movie stars were still movie stars, and Lana Turner had reached a pinnacle of movie land success that others could only dream about.
Candy, do you kiss with your eyes open or closed?
Open, honey. I don't want to miss anything.
Here, let's have a look at you. That's some outfit. You'll knock the governor in the cocked hat with that tonight.
The governor? But, Candy, this isn't my dress.
You don't mean to say you're going to cover all that up?
What a woman wants to know about a man is whether he has decent, honorable emotions.
I've got decent, honorable emotions.
Stop scratching on that door. You can't come in.
Turner was terrific in the minds of moviegoers. She was the essence of sophisticated glamour, the epitome of otherworldly beauty, and had become the quintessential Hollywood star. During World War II, the young screen siren joined Hollywood in the war effort and was a radio favorite of the frontline troops.
Just to prove there's no request too large, fellas, here she is, Lana Turner.
Hi, Bob. Say, have the FBI men found a steak yet?
Yes, it's backstage. But, Lana, this is dangerous. If this audience sees steak, they'll come right up here after it.
Oh, I don't know. They've seen ham all evening, and you're still here.
Right now, I'm vacant.
Turner's success on the big screen was everyone's fantasy. However, her off-screen life was a tortuous merry-go-round of disastrous marriages, doomed romances, and rocky relationships. "I really am stupid about men," she once told a gossip reporter. The one stabilizing force in Turner's life was Cheryl Crane, her daughter by restaurateur Stephen Crane. Cheryl was born in 1944 and grew up to pass judgment on her mother's many subsequent suitors, often swaying Turner's own opinion of them. One of the few men Crane openly approved of, at least initially, was Johnny Valentine Stompanato, a bodyguard for notorious mobster Mickey Cohen. Stompanato, who had always loved the glamorous atmosphere of Hollywood and desperately sought entry into its rarefied environs, had telephoned Lana Turner immediately upon hearing that her marriage to actor Lex Barker had dissolved. Their resulting romance was characterized by casual violence and deeply emotional passion. And on the night of April 4th, 1958, the combination proved too much for 14-year-old Cheryl to take. As she stood outside her mother's bedroom, she heard a violent argument taking place between Turner and Stompanato and listened as the gangster threatened to cut her mother's face with a razor. Responding with an impassioned fury, Crane grabbed a butcher knife with a 9-inch blade, rushed into the bedroom, and fatally stabbed Stompanato with the weapon, as Turner stood by in horror. Crane was charged with manslaughter and was brought before the juvenile court where a weeping Lana Turner defended her teenage daughter's actions in a highly publicized testimony. Crane was subsequently made a ward of the state and placed in a reform school for girls, where the restless youngster made several escape attempts. Years later, both mother and daughter found stability in their lives and were happily reunited, leaving the grim specter of Johnny Stompanato well behind them. Hollywood during the late 1960s was a chaotic and freewheeling epicenter for social change. With loose living, lifestyle experimentation, and wildly personal self-expression being the order of the day. But legendary actor Ramon Navarro was insulated from the wild social scene of the 60s, living in comfortable retirement in his Hollywood Hills home. 40 years earlier, Navarro had been a giant in the industry after catapulting to instant stardom in the silent screen epic Ben-Hur. With the untimely passing of Rudolph Valentino in 1926, Navarro became heir to his screen legacy as a continental lover, and later made a leisurely transition to character roles for movies and television. But on Halloween night, 1968, the 69-year-old actor was savagely attacked and murdered in his home. Police detectives called to the scene could initially discover no motive for the brutal, senseless killing. But using routine investigative procedure, they noted that a telephone call had been made to Chicago from Navarro's home on Halloween night. The call was traced to two brothers from Chicago, Paul and Tom Ferguson, who were arrested and charged with the horrifying murder. At their trial, the brothers revealed that they had learned of Navarro's discreet practice of hiring male prostitutes and had coerced their way into his home. They then proceeded to ransack every room in the place in a desperate search for money. When it was not forthcoming, they tortured and bludgeoned the aging actor to death. The brothers were convicted and received life sentences, closing a chapter on one of the most unfortunate of all Hollywood sagas. Equally tragic, however, was the untimely death of Sal Mineo, murdered outside his West Hollywood apartment in 1976. Mineo had come from a tough neighborhood in the Bronx and gained a reputation as the switchblade kid in early stage and screen roles.
So you're Garcia's kid, huh?
Haven't seen him in maybe 4 years. He went for a walk one morning. He never came back.
Well, you know how it is. Man gets restless.
Oh, yeah, the same with me.
You're a good kid. Garcia would have been proud of you.
What do you mean, would have been?
By 1955, Mineo emigrated to Hollywood to play the sensitive Plato in the classic film Rebel Without a Cause. Mineo's performance brought him instant stardom, earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, and paved the way for a successful career as both a performer and theatrical producer. Although he received upwards of 5,000 fan letters a week at the height of his fame, Mineo's outlook on life and on Hollywood's stardom seemed continuously tortured by inner tensions and anxieties. On the night of February 12, 1976, after rehearsals for a new play he was directing, Mineo drove to his West Hollywood apartment, parked his car, and began walking down the poorly lit corridor that led to his building. Suddenly, an attacker emerged from the shadows, rushed up to Mineo and stabbed him repeatedly in the chest, killing the actor instantly. Police detectives investigating the mysterious and apparently motiveless murder later discovered homosexual magazines and literature in Mineo's apartment. An initial theory was that the crime had been the tragic result of a lover's spat. But nearly 2 years after the killing, Suspect Lionel Ray Williams, charged with a rash of robberies in Minio's neighborhood on the night of his murder, was tried and convicted of the crime. Minio's murder, as it turned out, was the tragically arbitrary conclusion to a night of senseless muggings and burglaries, and nothing more. Like his fellow rebel co-stars, Natalie Wood and James Dean, Sal Minio's final headline would describe a violent and untimely end. Yet despite their often tragic fates, the faces and performances of the classic Hollywood stars remain wondrously alive in our memories. Our acknowledgement of their vivid contributions to the world of entertainment will remain with us forever, even as we mourn their eternal place on the Hollywood police blotter.